it just gets more intense every year how separated Bestball ADP becomes from Redraft ADP. It's just drastically, wildly different.
This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Mr. Daigle. What's up?
Oh, is that what it is? I thought you had a bigger point off the top to make. What is up, JJ Zacharyson? It is the off season. It's the June, so I still have lots of energy right now, as opposed to if you were to catch me in November around the holidays. It's sunny and beautiful out. That's what's up right now.
That'll go down as the worst intro in podcast history.
I completely agree.
So you should be thankful that you're part of that. You should also be thankful, Daigle. You are the second, not the first, but the second returning guest to Late Round Perspectives. Did you know that?
I did not know that. That is,
yeah, it's you and Mr. Matt Waldman. I had Waldman on last year for a prospecting show, and that's going to become a yearly thing now. People really dug it, and we have two differing viewpoints and stuff on prospects and the way that we approach things. And so I brought him back. But you're the first non sort of the Waldman thing is sort of like a I don't know how I would describe it. It's almost like a Super Bowl type event that I'm going to do each year, right? Whereas this is more of a, maybe you're top of my list and buddies in the fantasy space.
I'm opening for the Super Bowl. I'll take that on the card, honestly. I'll accept it as a compliment, but also I know how the content game works, and that you probably just looked back at last year's archive and you were like, I had these guests on at this at this time, and so I'm going to bring Daigle back on. And I could say that too, because Scott Fishbowl is in a couple weeks. And last year at Scott Fishbowl, I swear, that was the thing that the people approached me the most about was our episode, which came out I think a month before SFB draft.
Yeah, it's late. It's basically the same time frame as this one.
And I think they enjoyed it just because I feel like if you were to go back and listen to that episode, we didn't answer anything. We were more bouncing questions off one another, because at that time, as it is this time, there were so many ambiguous backfields that we, maybe we didn't even get the answer to this day on the Titans backfield. I'm still not sure what to do there. But we were talking about situations like that. And really, as opposed to any other podcast that's very confident about it, I think we were both just questioning what the hell was going to happen.
I mean, look, welcome to the Late Round Podcast in general, though.
That's true.
Where I really just ask questions the entire time, and I want to push the research to folks and tell people, what I've seen and discovered. But people got to make, their own decisions at the end of the day too. I don't want to just say, hey, draft this guy without any sort of backbone to it. But I will say, I was looking at your Twitter, researching for this just to see if you had fired off any takes that we could talk about on the show. And I see you rattling people up over on the Twitter streets. There was one, I got to start off the show with this because I think I think it's a good discussion to have, but it's also hilarious the confidence at which you just threw it out there and you just let it sit and then walked away. But it was here's the tweet. This is from a day ago, so by the time this publishes, it'll be like 3 days ago. But it says this is do you know what I'm getting to here?
I know exactly which one you're about to reference. Yes.
This is about Tyrone Tracy.
I know exactly which one you're about to say. Yes.
You said so there's a video of Tyrone Tracy talking about using a grip strengthener, and he wants to be, one of the great New York Giants running backs, saying all the right things to the media, right? Tyrone Tracy, a guy that I think you liked last year. I certainly liked last year. And he had a good season, all things considered. You said in a quote tweet to this video of Tracy, you said, quote, Tracy was and then in parentheses, significantly better prospect, especially in pass pro, than Cam Scadaboo was at any point in the pre-draft process. Only hang up were those 5 pesky fumbles during his rookie year.
Spot the line.
So I want you to elaborate, because I think it's a really interesting take. So are you referring to Tyrone Tracy and his work only as a running back in college, I'm assuming, and seeing what he brought to the table there, seeing what Cam Scadaboo brought to the table, and you saying Tyrone Tracy is just the better player straight up?
Athleticism and explosiveness is what I'm referencing to. So there are metrics coming out of college and how we weigh both Scadaboo and Tracy as prospects at this stage of their careers, going back to last year, of course, for Tracy. And I don't it's funny you mentioned Waldman now at the top of the show, because like Waldman would be much better talking about this than me, and maybe he already did with you, but I don't know what to exactly look for in correctly pass blocking whenever evaluating running backs as such. But from everything I have seen in terms of like the actual metrics for it from Pro Football Focus, Scadaboo also may be the nation's worst back in pass protection. And that's where, according to ESPN's Jordan Renan, he's being used as right now on third downs. So when you look at what Tracy accomplished last year in terms of explosiveness and pass pro and receiving the ball, in my opinion, he is the outright better player than Scadaboo. I'm curious on your thoughts on it, though, because like Fantasy Points, Ryan Heath, for example, is doing tremendous work right now on what I think matters the most, and that is what is relevant, what's most sticky and carries over year to year. And Tracy falls into that bucket of running backs who were very explosive, but similar to Saquon Barkley a couple years ago, really got held back for their offensive line, like not helping them whatsoever. And maybe that's the case again this year, but Tracy showed he's explosive enough in terms of the rate in which he gained 10 and 15-yard runs that he can still make his offensive line better, whereas some running backs can't. And due to the athleticism, I'm questioning if Scadaboo can do that.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point to make. I like Tracy a lot as a prospect. Like I said, he had, the right size speed profile. He had really good receiving numbers, obviously, having been a converted wide receiver. And so, last year, honestly, probably, and look, I got plenty of stuff wrong. Probably my best in-season call was being like 2 weeks ahead on Tyrone Tracy and getting him off the waiver wire. And so, like, he's someone that, there might be some bias. That's why I'm bringing all of that up whenever I'm talking about this. But with that being said, you mentioned looking at numbers that are sticky year over year. And what I really try to focus on is what is the market already capturing with those numbers, right? And that's why, like in the late round draft guide, when I do all my analysis, it's based on ADP expectation, because the market's going to factor some of this stuff in inherently, right? Like, for instance, I've talked about mobile quarterbacks with running backs and wide receivers, and mobile quarterbacks with wide receivers actually gets factored into a decent degree when you layer on top ADP. Excuse me. So it doesn't matter, as much when you're actually drafting, as long as you're drafting these players at cost, right? And so with Tyrone Tracy, I bring that up because Tyrone Tracy with middle round running backs, you want ambiguous backfields, is exactly what you get with the Giants right now. So then your question is, which running back should I prefer between Cam Scadaboo and Tyrone Tracy? You want receiving backs. You want guys who are in their second year, ideally in the middle rounds. They hit at a really high rate, more than rookies do in the middle rounds. And so, you also ideally want guys coming off of these like good, robust yards per route run seasons. And the reason for that is because that improves their probability of hitting that high target share. There is a correlation there. Did an episode on that a couple weeks ago. And so Tracy in that department lacks a little bit. He's not in the Chuba Hubbard, Ramondre Stevenson, Jordan Mason bucket of like really, really poor previous season yards per route run, but it's the next tier up. And Tony Pollard's actually in that too. So I'm not saying that like he's doomed. I'm just saying that that's the analytical, the stuff that I'm looking at, versus ADP expectation. That's the analytical red flag. But I even mentioned this on my Discord, like last week, that I've been buying more and more into Tracy being the guy that I'm going to be more into in that backfield versus Cam Scatterbu. To me, it's not a backfield that I'm going to take that heavy of a stand just because I don't know if there's going to be crazy fantasy production that stems from it. The way that like we're going to throw darts like crazy at Jacksonville. But I do think that Tracy is the one that I prefer at the moment.
It's also just the fact that right now you can't say anything that is deemed as negative about any rookies. We're just in that time of the year where their ADPs are surging just based on best ball. Best ball, which again, by the way, and going back, because both you and I are doing a lot of season-long work right now, it just gets more intense every year how separated Best Ball ADP becomes from Redraft ADP. ESPN just put out a mock draft. So it's the first, I've been doing like high-stakes FFPC drafts just to keep in the loop of tier windows for season-long. But ESPN just put out like a mock draft, which is closer to home league that they'll see ADP, and it's just drastically, wildly different, as we would expect. Most in particular, running backs being heavily drafted in the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, there's that. You get, rookie. Like, that's why, like, all my analysis has always been rookies are just great. Rookie wide receivers, especially, are just always great values versus ADP. And if you look at best ball platforms, go to DraftKings right now, and you'll see, guys get drafted, in a reasonable spot when they're rookie wideouts. I mean, I'll make the argument that, like, Mecca Egbuka goes too late and stuff, but like generally speaking, rookie wide receivers are going in reasonable enough spots. And then you look at average draft position off of like Yahoo or wherever, and it's shocking to see
totally different.
That like you'll look at like, Trey Harris and Jaden Higgins types, even not even Matthew Gold, not even the first round guys, but the second round guys are like in the wide receiver 60s in some of these on some of these platforms or 70s, right? Where like, why would you not throw that dart at a Trey Harris in this offense where he's going to be starting, where that he can play a vertical role? Why not throw that dart whenever you're talking about him versus Xavier Legette or something like that, right? Like, we already know what we're getting out of Legette. Why would we not take the chance on the unknown, right? But a lot of, the way gamers think, and it's been this way for years, they hate the unknown. They hate the ambiguity of it all, which is why ambiguous backfields are a thing. It's why these younger players are often a thing. I mean, middle round running backs, one of the craziest things that I've discovered over the years is that middle round running backs, they perform better when their previous season PPR points per game is lower, not higher. And the reason for that is when it's higher, you have to ask yourself, okay, why did this dude have a 15 or 14 PPR point per game season and now he's being drafted in the middle rounds? Like why is that happening? Well, probably because there's something that messed with the structure of his backfield. The market is telling us that there's something going on with that player that he's not gonna be able to repeat that kind of performance. Whereas the unknown guys, the younger guys who don't have that much of a backbone in terms of points per game, they're the ones we actually want to target because people are like, I don't know where to place Rachaad White. I don't know where to place, these players who end up breaking out in a big way. And that's why they get pushed down draft boards and they become better values.
That sounds like a couple players last year, but Raheem Mostert stands out. Someone who, was a top 5 player in terms of points per game in 2023. And then last year we get to the offseason, and it's easy to say this in hindsight, I know, but it was pretty obvious that, a 31-year-old Raheem Mostert coming off career high in touches and games played. It's like that can't sustain even at like an 8th round ADP. And that's something we should avoid. So that checks out. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Let's start this conversation. I know we already kind of dug into some stuff, but I want to talk a little high level and philosophical before we get into player takes. I sent you a text with when we were talking about this show, and I was like, look, man, it's June. We can just like fire off some stuff. People will dig it because we're kind of like workshopping ideas right now. And we did this last year too. We're kind of workshopping ideas. We're figuring things out. These aren't set in stone, player takes that we have necessarily right now. But I do think that it's important to at least have these conversations, and you're perfect for the conversations because you're a season-long bro as well. But when it comes to this 2025 season, I want you to think about yourself in January 2026. The season's over, okay? When we're looking back on the 2025 fantasy season, what do you think is the draft strategy that won people the most leagues in 2025?
I've been leaning on hero running back heavily, and I think that's just because the way wide receivers work in the into the first, second round, and I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point, then it really opens the door to start with a strong running back, and that depends on how you're tiering your players, but you can get Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, lean on one of those guys, and then tack on wide receivers from that point forward. At the end of the first round, I'm still debating, like, do I want to double tap running back if CMC naturally falls? And in my opinion, he will to the 112 in home leagues every single time. And by the way, again, we'll probably get to this later, but I'm going to build my entire personality around 112 CMC. What could go wrong, by the way, this offseason. Like, but yes, I'm still debating that because the wide receivers are so good at the end. The fact that we can start Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas or Nico Collins, JJ Brown from the end of drafts. Yeah. But overall, overarching view, I do think Hero RB is going to be the way to go. And then just getting ahead of those wide receiver windows because there are cliffs. The dead zones shifts every single year. Curious to your thoughts as what you believe in terms of ADP. The dead zone for running backs is this year, but just in terms of where player tiers are falling, like for wide receivers, there is a group of Mike Evans and Terry McLaurin I want to be ahead of and make sure I get the players before that, because that seemed to me that resembles the cliff where we start getting into more AJ Pex and ambiguity. Yeah. And then for running backs, I think that tier comes much quicker for Kyren Williams, Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, that group of players.
Yeah, I actually, in the draft guide this year, I'm kind of changing my tune with the running back dead zone. And I say that from the perspective of, I think we oversimplify what the dead zone is, and it can get people into trouble a little bit. And what I mean by that is I've talked about the dead zone plenty. I didn't create the dead zone. Was Gretsch the originator of the dead zone idea? Was it Gretsch? I don't want to.
It probably was Gretsch. But anytime we ask who originated this idea, I assume it was Fantasy, which that may go over people's heads. Yeah. But he was he's the philosophizer of our time. Yeah.
Yeah. Regardless of whoever created it, I certainly didn't. Right. Yeah. But I've been talking about it for years on the show, and I've done episodes on it, all that good stuff. The problem I think with it is that I started at the baseline of, okay, the running back dead zone is real, because if you look at historical ADP, there is a drop off, and usually the drop off I would use was like mid round 3 into round, like through round 6 or so. Like the 7th round running backs you would get were not that much different than like early 4th round running backs, right? And then I realized, hey, the way that leagues are set up these days, there's so many variations that instead of looking at round taken, I would rather look at positional rank, right? So like if you look at RB 18, that's usually where, drop off, there's a little bit of a drop off after like RB 12 historically. And then there's a big one after RB 18. And it's the same, through RB 30. So basically like the RB 34 or the RB 33 would be giving you a similar ceiling as the RB 19 would. So there would be no reason to draft the RB 19 in that scenario, because you're not gaining any value in doing that. You could just wait. And so that's what the running back dead zone, historically was kind of about. The problem, though, is that since talking about the baseline of what the running back dead zone has been, I've then just gone on this crusade of like, okay, clearly running backs are coming out of the dead zone and still being viable to some degree. Like we see it every year. What are those running backs? What do they look like? Like, what are the traits they share? All that good stuff. And then at the end of the day, it's almost like the parabola meme of like, like something really basic, and then like you're like an expert in it and you go back to that really basic take of what you originally had. But basically, I think it's just an archetype area, right? Like it's just all it comes down to is not the fact that you're drafting a player at RB22 and that you should avoid the RB22 because he's the RB22. It's that oftentimes the players that people are taking there are, guys who don't have that established backbone of like being a good prospect. They're not players who, or they're players who are inflated based on, previous season points per game, like I talked about, or they're not young up and coming players. So really, if you remove like veterans from the data set and looking at the running back dead zone, you realize that there's really not that significant drop off that you would see when you're only looking at like first and second and third year, like younger, like able, good running backs in general. And so I've kind of changed my tune in that I don't want to label it the running back dead zone so broadly, because I think that listeners might take that as I can absolutely not target a player within this area of the draft, when the reality is you shouldn't be targeting certain players in that area of the draft. But that's an argument that you can make for any area of the draft. Like there's certain archetypes that we really shouldn't be targeting that heavily in the early rounds, like non-pass catchers that aren't Derrick Henry, stuff like that. Like we shouldn't be going after those types of players. And so I'm not saying that like I think the running back dead zone is dead or anything like that. Like we can still label it that way, but I think that the nuance is really important so that someone who's being introduced to that topic, isn't taking the wrong things away from it.
And this probably goes back to more player takes, but your example, let's use Kyren Williams, because he's someone I'm conflicted on right now, just because I weigh the range of outcomes and it could go either direction. Like on the positive, on one hand, he's literally led Sean McVay's backfield in touches and 30 consecutive appearances. No one's else come for him. All he does is shove it back in our face every single game, every single year. Despite not being explosive, despite not earning targets, he just gets it done because the lone skeleton key is touches. And like if you're getting those touches, especially in those windows, then yes, Kyren Williams can deliver. Having said that, was the addition of Jarquez Hunter, someone you've talked about throughout the offseason, was that because, like the Chiefs, Sean McVay is yearning for any amount of explosiveness, especially like if the Rams' offensive line were to fall apart and not really carry their running back in? Perhaps so. So again, that's a player take from it based on like your ADP nuance, but yeah, it could go either direction. And honestly, I think the longer we are in this industry doing this, like the more open I do become in saying, yeah, it could go either direction. The range of outcomes are wide, which is why I'm taking, like, rather than taking a stance, I'm taking both sides of it.
Yeah, I think you have to. Like, it's important. Like, whenever I bring it up every episode seemingly, but going back to like the Roma Dunze, Emeka Egbuka wars that I went through a couple months ago, where I essentially said that Dunze and Egbuka is kind of like a reroll in Dynasty for Dunze. It's not that I'm saying that Dunze loses that 100% of the time. It's more of a 55-45 thing or a 51-49 thing, or it just fit that roster particularly well, to go the route that I did. I don't want to rehash all of that. But my point is, whenever I'm researching and looking at these players and doing player analysis, I'm trying to look at both sides. Like Kyren Williams is a great example of that this year. Do you think that spoiler alert, Kyren Williams for a second straight year is on my players to avoid list, right? And so like I missed it last year. I think he outperformed expectation by 1.7 PPR points per game. That's ADP expectation. I don't feel as bad about last year because I had Derrick Henry ranked ahead of him. So like you still, came out fine if you went running back there. But regardless, like I have him again on the players to avoid list. You don't think that scares the crap out of me? Like I understand that he could see an 85% running back rush share once again. I understand that he's a player that is not, look, the Rams, I sent an email blast about this yesterday. The Rams backfield in terms of target share over the last 6 years, they have had an average rank. Okay. When you just average up their ranks in running back target share per season of 31 to 32, meaning they are ranking 31st or 32nd on average over a 6-year span in running back target share. They're not using their running backs as receivers at all. So what does that mean for a guy like Kyren? Well, it means that if you have a Jarquez Hunter that gets more work, or even a Blake Corum that even touches Kyren Williams' 85% running back rush share last year, and it turns into a 70 to 75% share, that has a pretty dramatic impact when you know that he's not going to lean on that receiving work because it's not going to be there, because it hasn't been there for the last 6 years. So, I'm totally I totally get that Williams has the upside that he has, but I also would argue that there's a lot of fragility to that kind of profile when you don't have that pass catching backbone. And that to me, I don't know if Williams is quite a dead zone back, or he's like starting the area where you're kind of like, okay, he's not quite a hero RB. We don't feel as good about him as we do Devon Achane or something like that. But at the same time, I do think that he is this archetype of player that we generally should not be heavily investing in because it can go south. And that's where we see the running back dead zone, and we see these running backs, not perform up to expectation, is because they don't have the attributes that we want them to have. It's not so much we can't draft any of them, because I like Breece Hall, who goes after Kyren Williams, right? Like Breece Hall to me is not a dead zone back, not a traditional dead zone back, because he has the tools and the attributes that we want out of a running back, in fantasy football. And so that's why it's almost like an archetype zone. It just so happens that these archetypes are all falling in the same spot, probably based on like supply and demand, and this idea, like, if I miss out on these top 2 round running backs, I got to force it and really get a running back, or else I'm screwed. That's the mentality of the drafter. And that just pushes these guys up draft.
And I think that's why, going back to where this all started, Hero RB will be the way to go for me, and what we're looking back at next offseason as what won leagues, just because it does seem like you can start with one of those top 4, 5 guys. And then during this range of running backs we have questions about, could definitely get there, like we said, Breece Hall, but we certainly have lots of questions. Maybe instead we should be drafting wide receivers in that range before the cliff hits in rounds 4 or 5, and we start reaching into like the wide receiver 3 through 5s.
Yeah, I also think Hero RB is the most foolproof strategy that is not going to be as influenced by some wild things happening in a given season, right? Like last year, Hero RB was still okay, even though running our RB2s dominated the way that they dominated, which we never see happen the way that it did last year. So like, I think that that's the right call, because it's not only like kind of foolproof in a way, but it's also this year especially really fits, into that mold. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Do you think that this is a year of late round quarterbacking, or are you more into the elite early round guys?
When you say that term for your brand and our friend Rich Rebar's Konami code brand, it's crazy, because it is, in my opinion, the year of late round quarterback, but not what you have built your brands on. Sure. Instead, the statues, like the pocket guys, like CJ Stroud, for example, last year, the QB5 in ADP, but now he's going in the later rounds, like round 12 on, where you can just draft him and set it and forget it. And guys like that are now falling. And so it is late round quarterback, but not for the running players. Dak Prescott, for example, it's basically the opposite of what we're doing with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's coming off career high touchdown rate and points per game. Dak Prescott's coming off career low touchdown rate and points per game, with the extremely upgraded cast and only 1 year removed from being the QB5 in weekly points and number 2 in the VP voting in 2023 behind Lamar Jackson. And yet you can still get him there in the 10th, 11th round, at least when we're talking about home league. So it's the opposite direction, where I don't think we're going to get much rushing upside. Drake May and Bryce Young are the 2, in my opinion, that can push back on that. But we're still getting guys who, again, were top 10 in ADP at their position last year, and they're just falling based on 1 year that they did not live up to those expectations.
This is the perfect example of the episode I did on touchdown rates, and how touchdown rates, again, this is like the same thing as like previous season points per game and with middle round running backs. Previous season touchdown rate, you actually want lower touchdown rates than higher touchdown rates, because touchdown rate will regress. Yeah. And so what happens is a guy like Jared Goff gets elevated into, like in home leagues, Jared Goff is going to go in like the QB8 to QB10.
Don't get me started. Like,
it's gonna be pretty aggressive with Goff because of what he did. 6.9% touchdown rate last year. He threw for more touchdowns than he's ever thrown for. The kind of performance that he's likely not going to repeat. But even still, Jared Goff last season still didn't reach 20 points per game, despite everything going phenomenally well for him. I mean, they might throw the ball a little bit more this year, and that'll help combat the regression a little bit. But what you're basically describing is the touchdown rate stuff, where that fluctuates. So with pocket passers, you can jumble them up usually, and there's not going to be that much correlation between ADP and where they're drafted versus postseason result when it comes to these pocket passers. So you get CJ Stroud late. I like Trevor Lawrence late too. You get Dak Prescott later. And then earlier you get the guys like Baker and Goff is the one that's easiest to go to because at least Baker scrambled a little bit more last year and has really good weapons and stuff, and like, yes, there's going to be regression, but you can at least see it be combated a little bit. Even like Joe Burrow, like I think Burrow is the QB5 in fantasy, but I also don't think that there should be such a small gap between Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow in ADP, like overall ADP. So like I'm factoring in Joe Burrow regressing because I think he will regress in terms of probably pass attempts and touchdown rate. But even still, like I think Goff is just such an easy go. It's like Jordan Love when people were drafting Jordan Love last year high. And like we see these guys get elevated based on their previous season numbers when, to your point, you can just get these pocket passers later and they have just as good of odds to hit as some of those guys that are being drafted early.
Whereas last year, though, Jaden Daniels was a fringe QB1, but someone that was very easy to target for the rushing upside in home leagues. Bo Nix was also someone that was very easy to leave in the last round with, especially in Superflex leagues. You can group him in a crop of 3 guys you could draft. Drake May was obviously tougher because there was a window where we knew he would start, but we knew at the beginning of the year he would not. Again, it's different because these guys, these other ones we're drafting now, Jordan Love, Tua is also falling late just because he was injured, even though he was very good when he was on the field. He was injured. Who cares? And so these guys are now falling late. And so we're taking advantage of just the ADP dipping this year. Drake May is still like my favorite among that.
He's the easy go-to.
He's so easy. Yeah. And not to mention, like, we're talking about upgraded offensive line, upgraded surrounding cast and receivers, and Warren Sharp's third easiest schedule as well, compared to last year's 10th toughest schedule for the Patriots. New play callers all around. Josh McDaniels, who's actually been extremely efficient only when he's been an OC in terms of like EPA per play, so their offense at least gets it done in terms of explosive plays. Yeah, Drake May is just the simple one. I'll probably be stacking quite heavily this year.
Yeah, I've already been doing that in Bestball like crazy. The thing is, like, again, people think that I'm a late round quarterback only guy. I'm not. It's always been a game about value, and things have changed a lot over the last 5 to 6 years to where I think that the big 4 are fine to draft. I have no problem if people, because not only are they giving you some points per game edge, and a lot of people will do that VORP analysis and say, hey, these 4 quarterbacks are going to be X number of points better than the baseline player. So therefore, this is their value. So now let's compare that to the running back versus his baseline player, wide receiver versus his, and so on and so forth. The thing that never gets factored into those equations, those VORP equations, that drives me nuts is predictability. And with these quarterbacks, you have to factor in that we know who those quarterbacks are going to be. Josh Allen has been a top 2 quarterback for like 6 straight years. That has to count for something. It can't just be, hey, he's this many points better than his baseline, when we have a far, far more predictive player than we do at other positions when it comes to quarterback. That's why the big 4 and Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts are all really attractive in fantasy. Like maybe this has just been a long con for me that I've just been trying to flip the script a little bit and get this to work in my favor. But I think going with one of the big 4 is still fine. The problem that I have is more the middle round guys. Like I won't be drafting Patrick Mahomes this year, I don't think. At least in at least heavily, right? Because what changed to make me think that they're going to get vertical again? What really changed in that offense to make me think that they're going to unleash? And of course, he's a candidate to have an outlier touchdown rate season and be totally fine. But that's the kind of player that I just am not going to be overly heavy on. But at the same time, I'll still rank him within quarterback rankings. I'll probably still rank him where he's being ranked. It's just that people will draft him higher and way too close to the Jalen Hurts tier than they should.
The 2 that I think buck your trend, and correct me if I'm wrong. Well, you agreed with me on Dak Prescott, right? Because of the low touchdown rate, middle round guy.
Yeah, I love Dak.
Okay, good. Please don't knock all my
easy.
Dak Prescott shares right now.
No, I think Stroud is really interesting too, because he's the 3. There's 4 guys I think I mentioned on the touchdown rate episode. It was Dak, Stroud, Stafford, and Geno were the 4 pocket passers who could flip just based on touchdown rate this year.
Geno's also, barring injury, a 17-game starter that's not being treated as one, someone you can just leave like the last round with. I think because Chip Kelly and Ashton Jeanty suggest the Raiders will be run heavy, the Raiders defense does not suggest they'll be run heavy. Yeah, right, so exactly. I do like getting in on Geno Smith for sure. The other one you didn't mention, just because the environment change, you don't even have to squint to see it, is Brock Purdy. Obviously,
No, I love
based
Brock.
on all the injuries. Like if you look at
Yes.
Aaron Schatz works at FTN Fantasy,
Yep.
49ers, like again, you don't even have to look at the work. You should, but the 49ers clearly suffered the most injuries on offense, more so than any other team. Thus, their environment changes entirely this year. And best of all, like we see, as you mentioned, bad performances the next year, all those players dip. Like the Falcons last year, who all did return ADPs, even Kirk Cousins had his moments. Then the 49ers, all their ADPs have dipped in rooms as well this year.
Yeah. Yes, I love 49ers. Purdy also was running more last year. He was scrambling a lot more.
It was his best season. People don't believe that, but I would argue it was his best season as a professional.
Yeah. I'm in on Purdy as well, and like obviously I'm still going to be in on Kyler, and spot like I think he's fine because the mobility, and I like all the second year guys. It really comes down to I think Burrow shouldn't be as close to the elite guys as he is. I think Mahomes. Like Burrow to Jalen Hurts right now in terms of like Yahoo ADP, because I pulled that for the draft guide to kind of reference who should be targeted and avoided and stuff. He's only 5 overall spots away from Jalen Hurts in drafts, which is crazy to me when we know that there's not as much volatility. Of course, Burrow can get there, but when we know there's not as much volatility with his profile as Hurts because of the mobility stuff. But yeah, Mahomes, Baker, Jared Goff. I'm literally like 11 quarterback spots difference in ADP versus my rank with Jared Goff. To me, genuinely, and this is going to sound crazy, but genuinely, what is the difference in upside? Okay. I think Goff will have a better chance to match, QB8 to QB10, this year, but I'm talking about like becoming a true top 6 quarterback in fantasy football, a difference maker, someone that you can confidently start each week and you like starting him each week. What is the difference between Jared Goff and JJ McCarthy?
Ooh, I like that take.
In terms of upside, right? I'll take. I think McCarthy's going to run more. He's in an environment that we've seen quarterbacks thrive. The wide receivers and the weapons are just as good, if not better. I don't know why that would be a hot take. It seems like a pretty mediocre take to me, but it'll be taken as very hot because people look at quarterback, in my opinion, the wrong way. They see a guy like Jared Goff has a better chance to be QB 10 and QB 9 than JJ McCarthy. But I think McCarthy has a better chance to be QB 6 or QB 5. And that's what I care about more.
It's similar to it's always easy to push back against players when everything goes correctly and they still can't get the job done, can't win your league. Like Najee Harris, I think, is always the guy to reference. Leads the league in touches, and he's still the RB9 in weekly points. It was clearly easy to fade him the following year at the end of the first round. That's Jared Goff, coming off career highs, including with 37 touchdowns, and yet was still only the QB9 in points per game. Still barely got there.
That's what I'm saying. Again, what are we expecting?
Bryce Young, over his last 7 starts, I believe it was, averaged 4 carries and 22 rushing yards. Tacked on an additional 4 rushing points per game. That can easily usurp Jared Goff in a given week just for the additional carry. So yes, we can replicate. Again, this is your brand. I shouldn't be saying this. We can replicate that production quite easily.
Yeah, it's just an arbitrage thing. And so, look, I know that if Goff has a great season, I'm going to get destroyed, but I think this is a good process play. I think this is the right way to look at the position. All right, let's move on to wide receiver, because I'm looking at my players to target, my players to avoid for the draft guide. I've been writing that up, trying to get this draft guide finished, July 1st release for anyone who hasn't pre-ordered yet. But I'm looking at, how I come up with the targets and avoids is that I look at my rankings and I compare it to ADP and just see where I'm generally feeling versus the market. And wide receiver seems pretty efficient this year. And it seemed kind of efficient last year too. It's the one position where I feel like, I can make arguments very easily either way for these guys. And the position is so strong that I worry about missing out on, a big winner from the position, just because there's a lot of talent at that position. So I'm curious, are there any players in the top 30 or so that you just seem to disagree on from an ADP perspective right now at wide receiver?
No, I'm not kidding.
It's crazy.
Again, and that's why we referenced it at the top of the show, but I don't know when it comes down to home leagues. Again, Christian McCaffrey's probably going to be there, so I'm going to go there, but I really don't know. Do I double tap running back to get ahead of that and then draft wide receivers? Or because that's terrifying and passing on all of these dudes. Brian Thomas, Nico Collins, AJ Brown, Malik Neighbors. These guys will be there. Do I want to pass on all of them, I don't know, especially when we're talking about second-year breakouts. Nico Collins finally breaking out last year. Nico Collins, by the way, it's like a small sample. We drag in Sports Info Solutions data established to run for like our target per route run calculator to know on and off splits, which I personally love, especially when we're doing, like when I'm writing the weekly matchups along with Silva. The on-off split calculator is amazing for me. And like, it's a pretty large sample without Stephon Diggs available last year, but with Diggs off the field, Nico Collins had a 37% target share. Like,
that's insane.
And like you tell me, we've talked about it on my show at ETR in the past, but like Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, they are not the archetype that Nico Collins does. You can't replicate what Nico Collins brings to this offense. And so it's pretty wide open with we think a bounce back CJ Stroud year and a new offensive coordinator that, I just don't want to gloss over these guys. So I don't know how I'm handling it just yet, because again, I can't poke holes in the top 30 players. The players I mentioned that I believe are the cliff drop off this year, and Mike Evans and Terry McLaurin starting there, they don't go until the third or fourth round. Maybe that comes up a little bit in home leagues, but right now they're not top 30 in ADP. So I just don't know how I'm going to handle it just yet.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And for the record, Nico, spoiler alert, also a player to target for me this year in the guide, just based on his previous season peripherals were out of control last year. His targets per route run, his yards per route run, everything was insane. And now you get, like you said, Higgins, who I think is a better complementary piece than an actual alpha. Jalen Noel, who I love as a slot, but he's a slot. He's not going to be playing the same kind of role that Nico's playing. And even if it's Christian Kirk this year, then it's the same kind of deal, right? And so I love Nico. I love the Texans to kind of bounce back in the passing game. I think Nico is an easy. I don't know if we would even consider a dark horse to just be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy this year, right? Like just a player who could just be as good as the other guy. Like I think that's in his range of outcomes. So I'm with you there. And like when I'm looking at this top 30, top 40 wide receivers in the ADP, the guys that are on my avoids list are players who I'm only like 2 to 4 spots different in my ranking versus where their ADP is. Like one example is Garrett Wilson, where Wilson's wide receiver 13 by ADP. I have him at wide receiver 16. So all of these guys are like soft fades, but they're not full blown fades. And again, Garrett Wilson to me is like the Kyren Williams of wide receivers, where I understand the outcome, obviously, of Wilson dominating and having a great season. If he gets a 32% target share, which is possible, if he just gobbles up everything in that offense, which is very possible and in his range of outcomes. I'm just looking at the other side too, with Wilson, with my ranking, but even still, like the wide receiver 13 versus the wide receiver 16, especially when you look at tiers, it's not really that significant of a difference when they're all tiered up together anyway for me, and they're relatively interchangeable. I just think wide receiver is efficient this year. I do think McLaurin is kind of a fade, and he probably will be more in home leagues just because of what he did last year and that 13 touchdown mark not being as sustainable. But like, again, I don't think he's going to burn you. Like there's no obvious players like that seem like they're just going to destroy you.
Like I want to get higher on AJ Brown, for example, but I don't know. I don't know how to get higher. Like last year, AJ Brown, and this is why we use rate stats, not counting stats, because the Eagles did not have the passing volume at times.
Right.
But AJ Brown was one of only 2 receivers in the entire league to command at least 31% of his team's targets. He had less than a 26% target share in only 2 games all year. All he did was be the wide receiver 1, not 1A to Devontae Smith, the 1, similar to Tyreek Hill over Jalen Waddle in past years, not last year. But again, like how can I push AJ Brown any higher when Thomas and Neighbors are right there? It's just hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. Do you have any sleepers at running back this year, or wide receiver this year that folks might be able to get middle or late rounds?
A couple, and it's more about, I don't even know if they're sleepers, more about misunderstood ADPs, like Juwan Jennings, I think should be higher.
Yeah,
when someone like proves he can win your league and then does not go like in the first 4 rounds, like even Rashee Rice is there after a serious injury. Rashee Rice is there. Jennings is now like still round 7 or 8, even though last year with Debo off the field, he had a 41% target share. He had that overall wide receiver 1 week against the Rams, I believe it was. Like he proved he's a wide receiver 1. It kind of came out of nowhere, honestly, but he was a true wide receiver one and commanding volume. So love Juwan Jennings in the middle round. Late round is another one I'm confident in, and Marvin Mims, just because we talk about season long leagues and especially in that range, you're looking strictly for upside, and who has more upside than what he showed last year in Mims? At least 4 targets in 7 consecutive games to close the year, including the postseason. Sean Payton also mixed him in for 8 carries in that time. So perhaps his role, grows larger despite the addition of Pat Bryant, who I don't know how he fits in that offense. The one question mark I have that I am drafting a lot of, but it's more about, again, being in this industry for so long, and now I'm saying, maybe I got this guy wrong, and I can cross my fingers here. What are your thoughts on Keon Coleman in his second year?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can see the upside and the potential. I mean, again, I talk about ambiguous backfields with running backs, but ambiguous wide receiving cores are a thing too. And we would rather have, players who don't have alphas on their team, because that allows them to potentially emerge on that team. And you can look at, do they have an alpha? Just look at their ADP, because generally that's going to say, what kind of target share that player is going to have. I think it's interesting because, to me, I think Khalil Shakir is somewhat of a value, just if you want someone who's just a good baseline player, like just a solid, let's just get a wide receiver 3 who can maybe give us wide receiver 2 production, right? Just not, probably not a top 10 to 15 guy, but probably could be a 16 to 25 type player if things hit right. But yeah, I mean, like, I think Coleman has a role in the team, like a very obvious, like, this is what he can do for us. He can make these splash plays that we saw last year. I do wonder how they fit in Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, because Elijah Moore is getting actually some buzz out of Buffalo, and I'm curious how, because like I think they would see Elijah Moore as a field stretching type, which he can do, and then Josh Palmer is obviously that kind of player too. So I wonder how that would impact Coleman's ADOT and stuff. Maybe it helps because it makes him more of that intermediate threat where he's probably even a little bit better at doing. But yeah, I mean, like, targeting that kind of player makes a ton of sense.
It's funny that we're still scared of Elijah Moore. And I think we're right, by the way, but anytime Elijah Moore's name pops up, I do worry he's going to burn me, so I do get some late shares. When August comes around, we hear Paris Campbell's name, we know we're out on that. We've been out on that for 4 years now. Yeah. He's an August superstar, similar to how Devontae Parker was. But Elijah Moore still has, like, the peripherals that we enjoy.
Yes, I was looking at my late round dart throw section of the guide, and I had Elijah Moore. I just kind of like list out players at first, and then I remove them if I just don't want to write about them, or if I dig into them and I'm like, eh. And with Elijah Moore, like I've been stacking more. I've thrown him in like Josh Allen stacks in Bestball and DraftKings at times, like just last round kind of guy, whatever. But in season long, it's a tough argument to make that you would draft him. Like he seems like a player that we're going to be adding off the waiver wire, if anything. And then I looked at his previous season peripherals. He had a 0.9 yards per out run rate last year. And I was like, all right, this is not going to be an easy argument to make. It's just going to be all vibes based if I talk about Elijah Moore here.
Also, side take, since we are a friendly DraftKings show now, you can get Elijah Moore, like run him back if you're targeting week 17 with the Eagles, because on DraftKings specifically, it's possible to super stack the Eagles without Saquon Barkley. You just tack on Will Shipley instead in your 20th round and cross your fingers there that curse of 390 plus touches and efficiency in general catches up to Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to running back. We already talked about CMC a little bit, and Derrick Henry you mentioned, and maybe double tapping running back to start the draft, but around this time last year when we did this show, I have a quote that I want to read, because we opened up on YouTube. Rich Ryan does the editing for the video stuff, and on YouTube, he always takes a clip from the middle of the show. There's probably a name for this in the editing world, and then throws it at the beginning of the
I wouldn't
episode.
know it either. Don't worry.
Yeah, I have no idea what it's called. Someone will let me know. Actually, go tell me in the comments section on YouTube. That's what you should do. At youtube.com/@lateroundff. But you said this about Zamir White being an obvious fade.
For home leagues, we're going to have to get the message out there that if you took Alexander Madison in the 6th round last year, then you need to know Zamir White is right here wearing his Alexander Madison t-shirt. Hell yeah. What a show! Yeah. What a showman. What a quote.
What a quote. And so my question to you is, which running backs are this year's Zamir White?
Now I've gotten a year older. I'm not as fun now. I don't have as hostile of quotes. I also, when looking over ADP, because for running backs, the first two things I try to locate are the quote unquote dead zone and the guys like the Mike Davises, the Zamir Whites of the world who are inappropriately getting a high ADP based on what people are projecting for their touches. That's always what happens. Even though, again, go for Zamir White, it was very easy because even going back to high school, he was not a workhorse. Very easy to buck that trend. I don't know. Like you can correct me here, but I don't know if there's a Zamir White this year. I think my fade. I think Aaron Jones is 2024 Raheem Mostert. And that he's coming off a career high 306 touches in its age 30 season, hit a wall over the last month of the season, including the playoffs where he averaged less than 4 yards per carry. And the Vikings have shown us that similar to the Packers, who they saw Aaron Jones close his career with 5 consecutive games, 100 plus yards, and still said, we can't use or depend on this guy. Aaron Jones, don't get me wrong, was amazing last year. But again, we're still talking about that, not a breakout, but a rejuvenation in his age 30 year with the Vikings who had finite capital heading into the draft saying, we need someone else, and then going out and adding Jordan Mason instead. There are so many outs. You know, we haven't got to sleeper running backs at all, but Jordan Mason's definitely on that list for me because there are so many outs where the Vikings even used Cam Akers at time to relieve Aaron Jones. Like now we're talking about a guy that they went out and acquired for relevant draft capital who also showed he was explosive last year and can be a short yardage back. Jordan Mason can cap the upside of Aaron Jones significantly. So I think that's the player that I'm definitely going to be out on this year.
Yeah, I think it's valid. And there's a trend also with middle round running backs that when they're that old, you know, when they're past like, or when they're in like year 9 plus, their outcomes are usually not that great, which is not great for like a guy like James Conner.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily fading, but it's definitely one of the red flags. You know, I kind of look at these guys as where can I poke holes? And that's a big giant hole that we can poke, you know, with James Conner and Aaron Jones. What about, let me throw this name out there because he's someone who did not fit the mold very well with the previous season yards per route run stuff. Mm-hmm. And we only have seen this one great season from him. Chuba Hubbard. How do you feel about Hubbard this year?
Hubbard is someone I almost mentioned Hubbard, honestly, in this fading section. We've been discussing him in the ETR Slack because the rankings were initially high, and I think we've come back. We only have like a small sample, honestly, and you can give me because I know you have the data going back on Hubbard based on where he's going in ADP and the bucket he falls in. But like we only have a couple games of relevant data under Dave Canales, but we did see like in only 2 games that Jonathan Brooks played, Brooks in that second game actually did start siphoning and eating into Chuba Hubbard's workload. So much so that like Brooks led him in touches, both in the red zone and inside the 5-yard line in that second game before he was injured. And so now with both Trevor Etienne and Rico Dowdle on the map as well, I definitely worry about Hubbard trying to build off of this career high in carries and touches.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like I'm concerned about his receiving profile. And it goes back again to the yards per out run stuff. His yards per out run 2 years ago, not great at all. It was like 0.79, 0.72 or something like that. It wasn't good, right? And then last year it was 0.51. And again, we can sit here and blame scheme, and scheme definitely plays a role in any data point, right? But traditionally, that kind of running back, historically, we have not seen a middle round running back. If you count RB18 to RB42 as middle round, we have not, or RB19 to RB42, we have not seen a middle round running back get to a 10% target share per game rate who had a previous season yards per route run rate under 0.7 since 2014. And so Chuba Hubbard definitely falls in that bucket after having a 0.51 yards per route run. That's data courtesy of PFF. And if you look at what Carolina did this offseason, I don't think that they're going to go away from Chuba Hubbard the way that the Raiders went away from Zamir White. Mm-hmm. So that's not my analogy. That's not my connection here. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that the 2 guys that they brought in, Trevor Etienne, pass catching running back, Rico Dowdle can be a pass catching running back and a good change of pace guy at the very least. They brought them in to do the thing that Hubbard maybe hasn't been as effective at doing. And so I could see a scenario where Hubbard maybe Hubbard probably will not maintain the rush share that he saw last year, because last year for the majority of the season, it was him. There was no other alternative that they could rely on at all in that offense. And so I do think the rush share is going to drop a little bit, but I think the target share, where he had almost a 12% per game target share, I think that's where we're going to see 7 to 8%. And if that happens, he's not living up to ADP expectation. Like he can be he can still give you production, and he's not going to be a player. It's like a Jared Goff, right? Where it's like the dude is still going to give you something. He's probably not going to just completely burn your team, but we're looking for like superstars in that range, like guys who can legitimately, become league winning players. And you look at Chuba Hubbard, he's going 1 running back spot, 2 overall spots away from Alvin Kamara, who I think has already broken the mold from an age perspective and stuff. And like, he's seen an 18% target share every year of his career. And those kinds of players very rarely rank outside like the top 15 at running back, right? So Alvin Kamara is right there. Kenneth Walker is right there, who has crazy upside as long as he's healthy. So like, you can envision those top 6 kind of outcomes for those players. Then you get to Chuba Hubbard, and I just have a hard time seeing that.
We're zooming out for our analysis, but if we want to zoom in and just like use the 1 game sample where the Panthers had a relevant back, again, in that second game where Brooks was healthy, he even out targeted Chuba Hubbard 3-0 because, in my opinion, they were, like you said, yearning for a pass catching back, which they went out and got. So yes, I will group in Hubbard with Aaron Jones, 2 players I'm certainly concerned about.
Yeah. What about your sleepers at the position this year? And again, I don't want to, let's just say dart throws at the position.
Yeah, running back is always tougher to use the term. That's why I struggle with the term sleeper, because it's really about the touch windows. And the moment a starter comes out, suddenly the sleeper running back who was literally unusable in fantasy, now I can use him. And I think the perfect example of that is a quote-unquote sleeper for me, and that's Zach Charbonnet. Just because got a terrible run out as a rookie, which is how he was treated initially last year, and that he played like amazing run defenses in the Rams, Cowboys, and 49ers, and his 3 starts for Kenneth Walker. Then last season, Walker goes down. He gets a start. Everyone's not that excited because what he showed in the past, at least, Charbonnet was not efficient. And then Charbonnet comes out and his 6 starts, averages 19 fantasy points, 15 carries, roughly 4 targets per game. Showed that he is a workhorse who is also uber efficient. And so Charbonnet, someone who, with a new offensive coordinator, we also have this ambiguous opportunity that maybe his role grows even more, which is what I love in trying to find this mid-round sleeper running back, just a workload that we weren't prepared for. And so I'll group in Charbonnet with Jordan Mason as 2 guys I'll probably be higher on.
Yeah, I like that. A lot. Do you have a favorite out of the Jacksonville backfield?
I do not. Tank Bigsby was the significantly better player, and I think I'll still take a chance on him. But Bashal Tutin is so explosive that it could be like Isaac Garendo, which is another sleeper. But again, Christian McCaffrey has to get out of the way. Yeah. But it could be like that where he's just a walking explosive, even on like 5 carries.
Yeah. All right, let's look at tight end really quick.
Well, hold on, no. Don't you dare pass on that. Give me your opinion on the Jags backfield.
My opinion is I worry about Bigsby from the standpoint of his receiving ceiling, right? Where we haven't seen him. I mean, he has like a career yards per route run of like 0.4 or something. It's really bad. And so I do think he's probably the best like early down runner that they have. And I liked Bigsby as a prospect, actually. I remember him coming out. He was the Zap model liked him. And so I think he's the best like early down runner that they have. And then you look at ETN, but I'll say this. I'm probably going to be most into Tutin of the 3 because I know that rookie running backs have that ambiguity and that unknown and that upside from that perspective. You know, ETN is coming off his worst season as a pro. And really, I know that he was fine in fantasy 2 years ago, but even his secondary numbers were not that strong 2 years ago. They weren't very attractive.
When you get outperformed by a guy who is nicknamed Tanking Bigsby after his rookie year, that's not a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I can see ETN being fine, but I think that if you're looking at like the impactful weeks of the season, the late season stuff, and the guys who could really be league winners in the playoffs, like Tutin would be the guy that I would lean on.
I'm in a dynasty league where we just cut down to 18 players, and I had to cut. I didn't have to, but I cut Ramondre Stevenson. Because like Travis Etienne, I viewed it as, how does this guy impact my lineup whatsoever? Like he's going to give me a 24 to 36 finish one week. But other than that, he is not going to win anything for me. So like Stevenson to me is Travis Etienne.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, let's talk about tight end. Are you in or out on the elite guys? And then, because it does feel like last year was sort of like a transition year with ADP and how it was a little bit more jumbled. Now we finally have this like, okay, clear tier at the top. You get 3 tight ends that most people feel comfortable with. Are you comfortable taking them given the opportunity cost? And then also, are there any late round tight ends then that you'd be eyeing?
I am in on elite tight end, but not the way everyone else is. I do think Brock Bowers' ADP is going to separate itself enough from Trey McBride. And I think Trey McBride could outscore Brock Bowers, which I think is kind of a hot take right now. And so I will be on McBride and Kittle and getting them because I think their ADPs are far depressed based on, bounce back stats as opposed to Brock Bowers, who was just outright good. That shouldn't count as a negative, but the fact that McBride led in all the peripherals you look for, target share, route participation, he just didn't score touchdowns. That's okay. That's the same thing that happened to George Kittle early in his career. Couldn't score touchdowns despite being used heavily. So I love McBride in the third round of home leagues, and then George Kittle as well. Like we talked about with the rest of the 49ers, we didn't dive too much into Christian McCaffrey. We talked about the wide receivers so far, but George Kittle also is suffering like the 49ers in terms of depressed ADP, and it's just wrong because he's aging like fine wine. Especially when you remove Deebo Samuel from the field. Last year, Kittle he's made 4 full starts with Brock Purdy. It's only 4 games, but 4 full starts with Brock Purdy and without Deebo Samuel. And he's averaged a 33% target share and 14 points per game. He's a walking tight end 1 who's now going in the 4th and 5th round. So those 2 guys is what I'm building elite tight end strategy around.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Someone asked a mailbag question last week about being concerned about Brock Bowers. My answer was, don't be concerned about Brock Bowers at all. As a player, and it was a Pete Carroll thing, and I'm like, okay, but Pete Carroll also had Luke Wilson. It's not like he had Brock Bowers. And the only time that Pete Carroll had a good tight end was Jimmy Graham, and he was a top 10 tight end basically every year that he was there in Seattle. And so, I kind of brushed that away and aside. I didn't really talk about Bowers at cost though. And so I do think it's a good point to make that I don't mind taking Bowers, but it is difficult. The wide receivers we talked about earlier. And if you had to take him over some of those guys, that's where it just gets really, really difficult to do.
Also, quick side note, based on that question, it's proof that we are always going to have jobs in this industry because it seems like we go full circle every 3 years or so in terms of, I thought we had already solved that positional target share doesn't matter to an extent. You can't say this coach only targeted this tight end when this tight end was Rob Gronkowski. So of course that coach targeted that tight end.
You got to layer. You got to layer.
I thought we already were done with that, but these questions mean we're never going to be done with it. Yeah. Also, to that point, that's what's happening right now with route spaces and routes, with ESPN Open Score, for example. Good, a good stat to use, but not relevant for fantasy whatsoever. And I thought we already proved that. We solved that when NFL advanced data came out with spacing and routing. It proved to not be sticky at all for fantasy, and yet we're going back to it with Open Score, which makes no sense at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there from a data perspective that doesn't matter, and I try to focus on the stuff that obviously does.
Same.
And there, the personnel. I wrote a newsletter blast yesterday talking about 3 coaching trends and opening up the blast and the intro, talking about how there's so much noise to coordinator data because there is so much noise to coordinator data. You have to have a really long, and the 3 coaches I talked about were Sean Payton, Sean McVay, and Greg Roman, who are all 3 guys who we have a massive sample size on with a lot of, and it was all running back related. It was, Roman's pass catching usage with running backs and, Sean Payton's pass catching usage. And then obviously Sean McVay is in the same way. I talked about that one earlier, but you have to look at all of that with a grain of salt and you have to layer on personnel. When I see Sean Payton go and cycle through a lot of different running backs, including the last 2 years in Denver where they didn't have anything significant and they're still top 5 in the league in running back target share, I care about that. When I see Greg Roman's teams consistently not target their running backs much out of the backfield at all, and people think that Greg Roman is this amazing coordinator for running backs. But you look at like Frank Gore and how he did with and without Roman. You look at his Greg Roman has never had a top 10 backfield in points in fantasy points scored throughout his 10 years of being an offensive coordinator, which is crazy because that's not the way that folks generally view a Greg Roman offense. But a lot of that is just driven by the fact that they don't target their running backs that much. And they didn't last year either when they had, J.K. Dobbins leading the pack. And then the Sean McVay thing I talked about earlier. I mean, they've just not targeted their running backs whatsoever out of that 11 personnel package. And so there are some trends that I will, lean on and say, okay, this is a thing. But when you look at, if anything, the Pete Carroll thing told me that when he has a tight end, they actually are. I mean, Jimmy Graham was sort of past his prime when he got to Seattle, and he was still a tight end one every year he was in Seattle. So if anything, it makes me feel better about Brock Bowers because when he had a tight end, he used that tight end and he was good. And so I think Bowers is going to be fine. It's just that I think that there's a much larger opportunity cost in drafting him than the other two guys in the big three.
It sucks that the game we play, we feel bad about drafting good players. We should just always make this easy for ourselves and go draft good players like Brock Bowers. But that's not the game, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly still going to be getting some Bowers, but
I will admittedly have a lot more Trey McBride though. Again, based on ADP.
Yeah, and then late round dart throws at the position.
Not many, honestly, but rooms right now are allowing Tucker Kraft and Jake Ferguson to fall pretty heavily to like athletic specimens, especially Kraft, who already showed they have a ceiling when they stay healthy. Plus, Kraft is interesting because already a top 12 tight end in points per game, which doesn't mean anything. That means he scored a couple touchdowns last year, whatever. Yeah. But he does have an opportunity in that it is an ambiguous room, and we're taking shots on wide receivers, Matthew Golden, Dontavian Wicks included, but Kraft is involved enough, and there's no competition in that perhaps the winner in all of this is Tucker Kraft at a position where it's very volatile. So I think Tucker Kraft is like my favorite one to grab from the 10th round on.
Yeah, I've been buying a lot more into Kraft, over the last month or so. And I think that there's a chance that he ends up being a target in the draft guide when it's all said and done. All right, before I let you go, one bold prediction about this upcoming season.
We didn't even get to dive into it much, but I believe Christian McCaffrey will outscore Saquon Barkley in fantasy this year. Maybe it's not a strong take, but when you get to your home leagues, I believe he will fall to the end of the first round for you. And the past 2 full seasons under Kyle Shanahan, McCaffrey's been the RB2 and RB1 in points per game, and he's the only running back to average 21 points in multiple seasons in that time. He played 2 games with Brock Purdy last year, out-touched Jordan Mason, the 49ers backup at the time, 42-3 in those games. And that was when he was injured. Not to mention the Niners have Warren Sharp's easiest schedule in the league this year. So I will be all in on the 49ers, but Christian McCaffrey as a league winner in particular.
I love it. Daigle, thanks so much for your time, man. It's always great to talk shop with you. Let everyone know what you're working on, where they can find you, and where they can, read your work.
You are working on your intros. I am working at establishtherun.com, where I currently just put out all of our best ball content, including late round stacks for DraftKings. Again, DraftKings is fun right now because that's one place in particular you can super stack the 49ers, the Dolphins, and the Eagles with 5 different players from their offense and just nuke them all together. And then it's about season-long time for us. So by the time you're pumping out that guide on July 1st, Silva and I will be going back to the basement and working on our team previews together. So it's that time of the year.
It is. It's awesome. I'm excited for it. You can find me on Twitter at LateRoundQB, Bluesky as well, same handle. Make sure you're pre-ordering the draft guide. That will go up by $5 on July 1st when it launches. So make sure you get in on that. Otherwise, everyone, enjoy your weekend, and thanks for tuning in.